Should you always follow best practices? At our Q&A session during the August virtual conference, an attendee asked when Jakob Nielsen feels comfortable deeming something a universal best practice. Here's what Jakob had to say.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think it's a universal best practice, but it would be like a prevalent, a very widespread best practice. And my kind of guideline for guidelines, or sort of rule of thumb for this, is at about 90% mark. So if about 90% of the time when we do usability studies, we see that something is difficult for users, we will say, don't do that. Or if about 90% of the time we see something really works well, we'll say, do that. And that means that, maybe there's about 10% of the cases where that thing that we say don't do might work well anyway. Or the thing that we say do might not be the best thing to do, right? So, but the thing is, if you have 90% versus 10%, if you think about your design, what are the probabilities that you're in one or the other of those two groups? It's vastly the biggest probability that you are in the group of the 90%, not that you are in the group of the 10%. It happens, and people always think, oh, but I am special, and we are different. Yeah, and everybody is different. Everybody is special in some degree, but not to a big degree. And so if you come up with a different way of doing things, that is actually a little bit better for your special circumstances than this kind of general best practice. Now, should you do it? And I would usually say no, because the amount to which it's better is swamped or overwhelmed by the degree to which you cause confusion and difficulty for people who come in with the expectations caused by this majority of other cases. And you should also remember, particularly if we're talking about web design, that most of the time people don't use websites very intensively. Sort of a normal visit to a website is about 2 minutes or something like that. And it's not a lot of websites where people go every day or many times a day. There are a few, right? But mostly not. And this means that they will not really be able to ride up that learning curve, which is something we discuss in the course on the human mind, that people will tend to learn things by repeated exposure. But if they don't have repeated exposure, then they don't tend to get better and better at knowing that exact new thing you invented. And that means they will not get to that stage where it actually is better. Now, contrary, roll this back. Maybe you are in a situation where people use something repeatedly and maybe every day or very frequently. That would often be the case for maybe internal enterprise product type of situations, or maybe some really major websites as well. Well, then you can more assume that people might be able to ride the learning curve and actually learn something special or optimized for your circumstances. But that would be the exceptional case. And also, even then, remember that people don't get to the expertise stage without passing through the beginner or learning stage first. And so if you do something where people do have to learn because it's not the general best practice, I would really strongly recommend doing a lot of usability testing on the learnability, because that could be an impediment for a lot of people, and they may just go away and never reach the level of expertise. Now, okay, so the question was about when we will deem something a best practice. There's also cases where there's no kind of majority or sort of common a rule. There's also cases where there's two things that are half the time this is best, half the time that is best. Well, then we'll have to say that. Or sometimes maybe something is like 2/3 of the cases best and 1/3 of the cases some other thing is better. Well, then you still can't just say, well, do the thing that's 2/3 of the cases is true. You have to say, well, sometimes do this A, that's about 2/3 of the time, and sometimes do B. And under these criteria or circumstances will help you decide whether you're an A or you're an B. And if you don't know anything, well, then you do A, the one that's 2/3 of the time, because that's, after all, probabilities are with you in that case. But try to determine which of the two buckets you're in, right? But I think there's a lot of cases where we don't have to do that, because honestly, it is something that is established that most of the time, as I said, about 90% maybe, most of the time there are certain things that do actually work best in interaction design, because it's driven by the combination of human nature and the nature of the computer, the nature of the beast, the nature of the internet, that certain types of things tend to work well under those conditions. And also given the current state of technology too, obviously, there are certain things that we could dream about that might be nice if only we had something we don't have. Well, in that case, we don't have it.